Welcome to Girl Talk, where we talk about great women in history. My name is CKowalyk, and today we're going to talk about Fanny Fern. In simplest terms, Fanny Fern was an American novelist, journalist, and women's rights advocate during the 1800s. But let's dive a little deeper into this woman writer. Fanny Fern's real name isn't actually Fanny Fern. In fact, she was born with the name Grada Payson Willis. She was born in Maine in 1811, and her father named her after the mother of a minister he admired, but the rest of the family objected to the name. She later changed her name to Sarah, removing herself from her father's orthodox religious beliefs. Sarah was born into a literature and education-based family, and her father was a newspaper editor, and her brother had become a prominent writer. She spent most of her childhood in Boston, and in 1828, she attended Catherine Beecher's prestigious Hartford Female Seminary in Hartford, Massachusetts. After she finished school, Sarah went back to Boston and started to write for her father's children's magazine, The Youth's Companion. In 1837, Sarah married a banker in Boston named Charles Harrington Eldridge. Together, the couple had 3 daughters. But soon after, Sarah fell upon many hardships. Her youngest sister, Ellen, passed away during childbirth in 1844. A few months later, Sarah's mother passed away as well. The next year, in 1845, Sarah and Charles' eldest daughter, Mary, died after getting meningitis. Tragedy struck again in 1846 when Charles contracted a typhoid fever and subsequently passed away. This left Sarah a single mother of 2 children and no financial support. Sarah then remarried to a man named Samuel P. Farrington, who worked as a merchant. Samuel was not a feminist at all and was constantly unkind to Sarah, and he was extremely jealous. He accused her of infidelity and attempted to turn her own children against her. Sarah was not taking any of this and took her children and moved out. This made an already jealous Samuel even more jealous, leading him to spread more rumors about her, and he filed for divorce. It was time for Sarah to step into her strong, independent woman's shoes. Knowing she now needed to provide for herself and her children, Sarah took up the alias Fanny Fern and started writing for 2 Boston publications, The True Flag and Olive Branch. Fanny often wrote columns and chose to write about a variety of topics. According to the University of Central Florida, she covered topics such as class issues, poverty, and prison reform, prostitution, and domestic abuse. But most of her writing focuses on, you guessed it, women's rights. Right before her career started, the Seneca Falls Convention occurred, spurring women's rights to vote and women's place in society to be an even more hot topic in the United States, and thus guiding Fern's work. Fanny wrote many columns, such as Hungry Husbands, Have We Any Men Among Us, and What Came of Violet. But Fanny's columns weren't just regular old boring columns. No. Fanny was full of sass and spite, and she often used her wit and satire to get her feminist and progressive messages across. Her snappy style of writing caught the eye of many newspaper publishers, and Fanny soon became the highest paid columnist in the country. She was paid a whopping $100 per column. Not only did she captivate audiences and editors, Fanny Fern has also been the subject of many academic papers. For instance, Jamie Harker, a scholar, explains Fanny's style of writing perfectly. She writes, quote, Fern's millennialism is not directed only inwardly, but also outwardly, toward public policy and social mores, in public and political uses to which she has put this sentimental ideology, and through her unique blend of piety and blasphemy, end quote. Harker is exactly right. Fanny targets politics and the overall treatment of women in a way that puts it into the public eye, while expressing her ideas in a clever and entertaining way. Her work grew in popularity, and she soon became known as an advocate for women's rights and political reform. Plus, her alias kept her protected from her haunted past with a terrible ex. Not only was Fanny a columnist, but she also wrote poems, novels, and even short stories. One of her most prominent works is a fictional biographical novel called Ruth Hall. Ruth Hall served as a sort of autobiographical piece for Fanny, and in it, Hall is a woman seeking economic individuality and success without the support of a man. There are many similarities between Fern and Hall examined in research, such as the obvious connection between 2 women seeking to provide for themselves. Mahmoud et al. Wrote an insightful research piece, quote, Despite social standards, Fern's representation of Ruth's financial success highlights how women can surpass gender boundaries. Initially, Fanny Fern wrote Ruth Hall to support women and criticize gendered societies, end quote. It's clear that between Fanny's columns and her work on Ruth Hall, that the men in her life impacted how she wrote her pieces. Perhaps the most significant inspiration was from her horrid and angry jealous ex, as mentioned before. Plus, soon after Ruth Hall was published, a fellow journalist revealed Fanny's real name after he was displeased at how he was represented in her autobiographical piece. This led many of her readers to criticize her. With all she experienced, Fanny Fern became quite the activist for women's rights. Most of her activist work took place in her columns, where she took time to critique society's wrongdoings towards women and other oppressed groups. Fanny was the ultimate feminist icon, advocating for issues from opposing restrictive women's clothing to divorce law to getting the right to vote. And, with her work being in the public eye, Fanny's witty words got out to a lot of people. In 1856, Fern married James Parton. Parton was a much better fit, as he was the former Home Journal editor. Parton had resigned in protest over Fern's treatment at the hands of her brother, who also worked for the Home Journal, and he really banned any of Fanny's work from being published. The two led a happy marriage. Within the last 6 years of her life, Fanny battled cancer. She passed away on October 10, 1872, and was buried in the Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Fanny's words were so impactful that she almost got erased from history. At the time, it wasn't acceptable for women to occupy an academic sphere like their male counterparts. In 1855, Nathaniel Hawthorne complained to his editor that women should not be published in newspapers because it enabled them to access a large audience, decreasing his own chances to do so. He made a comment and called female writers, quote, "the damned mob of scribbling women," end quote. While Hawthorne felt Fern was an exception to this, many rejected Fanny's extreme feminist values and the fact that she was a woman writer. And as those in power write history, she was not included in many textbooks or lectures. Today, Fanny has inspired a wide variety of women writers to fight for what they believe in, especially in the form of written expression. And while it's hard to say exactly who she inspired, she paved the way for female journalists and writers to start publishing their work and to begin advocacy writing. We study Fanny's work to gather what it was like for women during the 19th century to fight for equality and the oppression they faced. Fanny's pieces gave us an inside look into women's life back then, and they provide us with an opportunity to learn from the experiences she dealt with. Many historians and Fanny Fern enthusiasts are working to archive and digitize Fanny's writing for all to access. Stories like Fanny Fern's remind us of how important it is to reflect on the past and let it guide how we work towards our future.